Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class on sketching a one-point perspective cupcake. Tonight's class is a one-off, 1 hour long class where we will be sketching this drawing of this photo that I provided for the class of this cupcake and the table behind it is in one-point perspective. And the cupcake has some perspective to it as well. And then in the next couple of weeks, we've got premium classes that you can sign up for, a 2-part class on creating this mixed media one-point perspective cupcake piece. So if you would like to continue on with this piece and add watercolor and pen and ink to it with me and make it look something like this, then make sure you sign up for next week's class and the following class, where we'll be breaking that down over the next couple of weeks. And then I just want to mention that I have several independent classes that I am offering outside of Michael's right now that I welcome you all to sign up for. I have a couple of lunchtime classes happening next week on Monday and Tuesday. One on Monday is moon drawing. We'll be drawing the moon, and it's a 1 hour class. And if you sign up through my website, I will send you the Zoom link for that class, and it will also be recorded, so I'll have recordings afterwards. And then on Tuesday, I'll be painting with coffee, so using coffee to paint. So I'll really be breaking down values to be able to paint with coffee, and that'll be really fun. And then I've got some other more intensive classes, like a portrait drawing intensive class happening in May. So if you'd like to subscribe to my mailing list, our lovely moderator just dropped that link in the chat, and you can get on my mailing list, and I'll mail you the links directly to sign up for those classes if you're interested. And if you want to just keep coming to the Michael's classes on Wednesday evening, this is an ongoing series, and I'm here every Wednesday night. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my tabletop view and go over supplies. So don't forget to tag your work with those hashtags, Make It With Michael's or Michael's Classes, and you can follow or tag me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. And after class tonight, I'll be doing a little Q&A on Instagram. So I'll be going live on Instagram right after this class ends for about 20 or 30 minutes, and I can answer any lingering questions that you might have, or if you want to just hang out and chat and have some commentary about these classes or questions about previous Michael's classes or anything else that I have going on, I'm happy to share. So make sure you hop over to Instagram afterwards for that, and at Adrienne Hodge Art. Okay, and then I'm also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art, and here's a few of my business cards. I'm always flashing on the screen. Okay, so pretty simple supply list for tonight. We're just going to be using some pencils, some graphite pencils with the H and B numbers and letters on them. So I've got the Staedtler 12 pencil set here, since it's got the full spectrum of H and B pencils. And then I've got a Faber-Castell eraser. And then I'm just going to be using a sketchbook to sketch tonight, but I did include on the supply list all of the supplies or some supplies that you could use to do this that can be purchased at Michael's. You can use, any watercolor, any permanent ink pens, and watercolor paper, tape. You'll need a water cup, paper towel, all that stuff. So all that may be listed on the supply list, because I wanted to, make sure everybody's prepared if you're planning to do the classes after this week for the next couple weeks, where we'll be creating this mixed media piece out of this. But if you want to just draw the cupcake with me tonight, then all you really need is some sketchbook paper. So I've got the Canson drawing pad here. Okay, and I do recommend, even if you plan to come to the next couple of weeks classes and you definitely know that you're going to do that and you want to use watercolor paper for tonight and go ahead and get your, groundwork on the watercolor paper, you can definitely do that, but I recommend still drawing it on scratch paper first, just so that you don't put any pressure on yourself to have a perfect sketch on the watercolor paper. Because a lot of times, if we erase too much or, have too many lines that we've erased on a piece of watercolor paper, sometimes when we go and paint over it in watercolor, those lines can show through. So it just depends on your skills. If you're very confident with your skills and you're able to draw nice and light on the watercolor paper, you could go ahead and get this on watercolor paper tonight. And so for those of you who do want to do that, because you're going to be attending the next couple of weeks, I was just going to talk about taping down the edges right here. So the way that you're going to do that is you're just going to grab some masking tape or some blue painter's tape, which was also on the supply list for the next couple of weeks, but this is not necessary for tonight. I'm just showing you. You don't need to measure to get this clean edge all the way around. Mine is, I did not measure, and all you have to do is just eyeball it. So you can just take the masking tape and you're just going to hover kind of half on and half off of your watercolor paper until it looks nice and even. And then you'll tape that down, and then you'll do that on all 4 edges, and then you'll sketch onto the watercolor paper itself. So if you are signed up for next week's class, that's the first thing we will do at the start of class next week. But we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on sketching in those classes because we have this class tonight to refer back to. So this is, in a sense, part 1 of a 3-part class, but this one definitely stands alone. Okay, so, and then the reference photo, let me pull that up here. So this is the reference photo that we are using. So you can print it out or you can work digitally. There's only one thing that I edited out of this photo for the drawing. I just wanted to point that out, and that's the fork. I left the fork out. So I felt like there was enough going on in this image. Oh, and the chair. There's a little bit of the top of a chair over there, but I left those things in the reference photo, but we are omitting them from the sketch here. All right, any questions about supplies or anything like that before we get started sketching our 1-point perspective cupcake?
Somebody is wondering that in moving forward, can I use Sharpies instead when it comes time to using those darker lines?
Yes, and it depends. So if you were to wait until you were absolutely done with the watercolor to add the pen and you had like a Sharpie pen, then yeah, that would work just as well. But if most likely how I'm going to do it whenever we get to that part, I might get the pen going in there, like kind of in the middle of it, because it's kind of nice sometimes to like get those nice bold lines in there and then keep adding watercolor. Excuse me, my cat is trying to make a guest appearance in the class. Hopefully she doesn't keep doing that. I don't know if you guys even saw her because didn't let her get into the field of the camera. Anyway, okay, so yeah, Sharpie marker will bleed. Permanent does not mean waterproof. So you want a permanent and waterproof pen, which the Micron pens are permanent and waterproof. Faber-Castell pens are permanent and waterproof, and the Artist Loft illustration pens are all sold at Michael's, and those are all permanent and waterproof. So you can kind of do a push and pull between the watercolor. Okay, good question. Feel free to ask any questions like that, because oftentimes people are afraid to ask questions because they think that it's not a good question or whatever. And I guarantee you, people are always appreciative when someone asks the question they've been thinking of but are afraid to ask. So be the brave soul who asks the questions. Okay, so I feel like I say this in every single class that I teach where we're doing any kind of graphite drawing, but I'm going to be drawing with a darker pencil, and that is the only reason that I'm going to be using a darker pencil is so that you can see my lines on the Zoom, but I want you to use, as you're sketching this image, I want you to use a nice light H pencil, like a 2H or a 4H or just a regular H, something that's nice and light. And I just realized when we were talking about links to grab for previous classes, one class that I always like to refer back to is the very first class that we had in this series. If you are unaware of what those numbers and letters mean on the pencils, you can refer back to our very first class that was called Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms. And that was in July 2021. And we also had another version of it, I think the next month in August. So there's 2 versions of it on YouTube. And that explains the letters and numbers on the pencils. Okay, so I'm just going to dive in with sketching this piece now. Okay, so last week we did 1-point perspective studies, and we talked all about how to find the vanishing points in a photograph and all about orthogonal lines. And you can also refer back to an earlier series of classes that we had on perspective drawing and linear perspective drawing, where we drew just squares and then turned them into squares and rectangles, and then we turned them into 3-dimensional boxes. When it comes to an image like this, it can feel like it's got a lot of perspective in it, but the 1-point perspective in this image is actually, it's very minimal. So the only forms that are showing linear perspective in this image are the plate that the cupcake is on and the fork, which we're omitting, and then these lines on the table behind the cupcake. So these little wood slats, the spaces in between the wood slats on the table. And then the glass itself is showing some perspective, but it's mostly, it's not a, it's a cylinder. So the cylinder is maintaining most of its shape. Most of the perspective that's happening there is more what we would refer to as atmospheric perspective, or just the, how things look a little different when they're farther away versus up close. But the water in the glass is also distorting the lines on the table behind it. So they're kind of veering off in an alternate direction there. But mostly it's just, the lines on the back of the table and the plate. But the other thing, and Kiri's gonna be so annoyed with me because I was like, no, I can't think of any other class links to grab. But then the more I get into the class, I start thinking of other classes that would be helpful. So we had a class in February last year, so February 2022, and it was perspective drawing of a coffee cup. And that would be extremely helpful if you're struggling with the perspective on the cupcake, because the cupcake itself is showing some perspective. And that's the fact that these contour lines on the cupcake and even the vertical lines on the ridges of the cupcake itself, they are doing this thing where they have a equator line. So right in the middle, the vertical line is straight, but then everything on the right side of that vertical line at the center of the cupcake paper ridges, they begin to radiate out towards the right in a sort of, you know, like a moonbeam or sunbeam radiating out in that direction. And then on the left, they're radiating to the left. And if that's confusing, that class on drawing a coffee mug in perspective drawing of a coffee mug or coffee cup, that class will go into that, because we talk about the view of the coffee cup from above the viewer's eye line, and then from below the viewer's eye line, and then right in the middle of the viewer's eye line. So this cupcake is, does anybody know? And there's my cat. Once again, could anybody tell me, where is the cupcake? Is it below the viewer's eye line, or is it above the viewer's eye line? Tell me in the chat if you can tell by looking at this photograph. I feel like it's obvious, but I'd love to see that I've got some people who are, okay, great. I'm seeing tons of belows. Good. Yes, it is below the viewer's eye line. So the viewer's eye line is the person taking the photograph, which was me when I took the photo. And so my eyes, it was really where I positioned the camera, but it was, the eye line would be somewhere up here. And we know that because there is a curve down from all of the contour lines on the horizontal axis. Excuse me, Linda, the cat. Oh, you guys, my partner is out of town right now, and she is usually easily distracted by him, but she really wants to be where the action is right now. Okay, so there might just be a cat right off screen here while we talk. Okay, so the curved lines on the cupcake are all curving in a downward direction. Yeah, and even the cherry is curving down. Okay, so if we take our ruler, we can find, and this is using the same principles from last week's class. We can find the vanishing point and the horizon line in this photograph by just taking our ruler and lining it up with those orthogonal lines. I'm hoping she will just settle down right there and just sit there. Okay, good. She's doing that. Okay, so the vanishing point is where these lines appear to converge, because they don't actually do it. It's an optical illusion that we all mass hallucinate together. And you can check out last week's class or any of those other classes on linear perspective if this is brand new to you. But the vanishing point is about right here. Okay, so that's where we're going to start when we're sketching the cupcake. I'm just going to go right in the middle of my page, but you might want to draw a box for yourself. In fact, let me go ahead and just draw a box for myself, because I think that'll be the easiest for everyone to follow. So I'm not really too concerned about the measurements of the box. I'm just giving myself a field, and this will definitely help us to translate to the watercolor paper. You know, thinking about where we're going to tape off the watercolor paper. And also it can maybe just help us visually see where the center of the page is, and map things out. Easier. So I just drew a rectangle on the page. Okay, and then looking at the photograph, I can see that that vanishing point is, it's right about there, right? Yep, it was right there where there's kind of like a lightness in the little light moment in the window there. So right above the pineapple slice. So let's look at where that falls on the visual plane of the photo. And it is not halfway. It's a little bit above the halfway mark. I would say this is about halfway, and this is where the vanishing point is. I'm going to go a little bit more than halfway up on my rectangle that I just drew. And if you need to measure your rectangle and find the halfway point, and then just go a little bit above that. And remember, you're using a nice light pencil. So this line is going to be erased because this line is not actually in the photograph. So we'll just draw that line. And if my lines are not super visible right now, just give me some time. I'm going to turn off my light, might have been blowing it out actually. Things will get darker the more I, start to draw and emphasize things. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put my vanishing point right there on that dot. Okay, and then I'm just going to kind of save that for a second because I want to make sure I get the cupcake sketched in where I want it to go. So in reference to my vanishing point, the cupcake, the pineapple slice starts, actually, yeah, the pineapple slice kind of is right at the halfway mark on the page. So anyway, we're just going to go a little bit below that and start to sketch a little rainbow shape, or like a little arc, half of a circle there for the top of the pineapple. And then we'll create a little wedge shape out of that for the pineapple itself. And then we're going to eclipse that with our cherry shape. So we'll go ahead and sketch a circle. And all of these lines should be nice and light. Okay, so we want to sketch nice and light. And I am definitely being a little too aware of myself and wanting you all to see every line that I draw. And that's inhibiting me from drawing things well. I'm going to draw a little light, and you're going to have to deal with not seeing my lines for a second, and then I'll darken them. Okay. It's just like anybody else, or just like most people. There are people who can draw things perfectly the first time, but I am not one of those. I got to feel it out a little bit. So I kind of use the side of my pencil to find these shapes. Okay, so I drew a little circle for that cherry, but I want that cherry to be eclipsed by the chocolate sauce that's on the cupcake. So it's not a perfect circle. It's kind of got a little sandwich shape. Linda, you're driving me nuts, man. Please stop. Please stop. Go over there. If she keeps doing that, we're going to have to pause, and I'm going to have to put her in my kid's bedroom. I don't know what else to do. This is a new experience for me. Okay, so I am so sorry, y'all. I am going to just pause for one moment and go put my cat in the other room because she just keeps jumping on the table. You want to say hello to your audience one time for just the cute effect before you say goodbye? Okay, she's gonna go. I will be right back.
Just a reminder for anybody just joining us, you will be able to access this class in about 24 to 48 hours on our YouTube channel.
Okay, I'm back. Apologies for the interruption. Okay, so we want to get this cupcake shape in there first, but we don't want to get married to our lines. And I'll admit I was a little flustered by the cat. So let me recenter here a little bit. We don't want to draw this multiple times. We want to make sure that we have designated the space for it and then come back and make it more specific. So we're going to go general to specific here. So all we really want is the general idea. So I was getting a little sucked into the details. We don't want to do that. So we're just going to get the general idea of this cupcake. We're going to come back to it and make it more detailed. Okay, so we want like a half circular shape for the icing. Think of like a big circle right here, and you could actually, that would be a really easy way to get the whole thing in there. We could just draw like a big circular shape like this, and then turn that into, put a hexagonal shape on the bottom half of the circle. But then we want a half circle at the bottom for the cylinder shape of the cupcake. And then we want to curve down right here. And then I think that's probably good if we just leave that for now. And we want to make sure we get this shadow in there because that's such an interesting part of the composition of the photo. So we're looking for a circular shape that comes off of the bottom of the cupcake and then goes off the bottom of the page because the shadow goes off of the bottom of the photograph. Okay, and it's a little more pronounced on the left side. So it's not quite so, it's a little thinner over here. It's more of a elliptical shape. Okay. Can everybody see my lines okay so far, or does that need to be darker? Okay, I see at least one person said they can see fine. Thank you, Marty Mary. I think you're following me on Instagram. Nice to see you. Okay, so now let's get this plate in here. This plate is the part where we're going to need our ruler to connect to the vanishing point. So there's only that little bit of geometric forms happening here. So let's just use our reference photo as much as possible, or not as much as possible. We're going to use the reference photo a lot. The top of the, looking at the relationships to these forms to other forms in the photograph. So the plate comes out of the cupcake, like on the side right here, just above the paper on that side, and then it's kind of tilted up on that side, just above the paper. So it's not a perfectly straight line, and I already was trying to make it straight right there. So we'll go a little bit above the paper on this side, and then a little bit below the paper on that side. The plate was a little tilted. And then we're going to take the corner of that line we just drew and line that up with our vanishing point. And then we're just going to eyeball it. Like when I look at this plate, I can tell that it's not going way out like this, right? It's coming in, it's a bit narrow. So, and actually, the plate is not necessarily, because of just the angle at which we're looking at the plate in the photograph. We encountered this last week in the 1-point perspective studies class, that sometimes things are just, they're not following the lines, they're not following the orthogonal lines in the photograph because it's just the angle of that particular object. So this side of the plate is actually, it's not in line with our vanishing point, but we're going to make it in line with our vanishing point. So we're going to just kind of fudge it just a little bit and make it more in line with this line, because that's what I did in my drawing here. So that's what we're gonna do. Okay, so we're just gonna take our ruler. And if you want it to be exactly like you see it in the photograph, then you can just use your, you know, observational skills and just draw it more exactly like you see it in the photograph. But I'm going to kind of fudge it just a little bit there and make it do that. So it might
Adrian, folks
feel
are saying your lines are a little bit too light, I think.
okay. Yeah, if they're light, I'll darken them up. So the first time I draw a line, y'all are gonna have to just give me a break and let it be light. I am just not perfect. I'm not a robot, and I doubt any of you guys are robots who draw things perfectly the first time. So the first time I draw it, it's probably gonna be light, and then I will darken everything, I promise you. But while I'm just trying to find the right placement of the lines, they might be a little light. Okay, so same thing over here, and then we'll darken it up. Okay, I don't want it to be quite that skewed. So yeah, I'm just looking at it and just saying like what makes the most sense. Like I don't want it to be so skewed that it doesn't make sense. So I'm just gonna come in a little more. The spiral on my notebook is getting in the way of me putting it exactly where I want it to be. Okay, that looks pretty good. So something like that. But again, please don't draw your lines this dark. That plate is not necessarily, it doesn't need to be that dark in the, but then I guess it's not showing up that dark for you, but I just drew the lines really dark for you there. I'm not a big fan of hard lines because I'm a fan of making things look the way that they do in nature, and that is they are affected by the light that is falling on them. Okay, so once again, these lines are going to be light until we find where they need to go, but we're going to just radiate out from the center here. And I'm not drawing the line all the way down because that table stops just about here, or the table starts just about here on the pineapple slice. So let's go ahead and get our line for the table in there. So normally I would say to draw from your background forward, but since that cupcake is such a big focal point in the image, we wanted to go ahead and designate the space for the cupcake pretty early on. Okay, so as we radiate out, we're not drawing the full line, or if you are, you're drawing it nice and light so that you can erase it once you get everything else where you want it to go. And you could take the photograph and you could measure the space in between these slats and make sure that they are all, you know, evenly spaced. I did not do that in this image, and I don't think that it's super necessary or noticeable that I didn't. So I'm just gonna kind of spiral out from my center line, my vanishing point at the center, and I'm just gonna get some more of these wood slats in. So I'm just scooting my ruler out a little further each time in a radial way to spiral out like that. And again, if they're too close together and you want to spread them more apart, then draw nice and light so that you can erase them. Like those were a little we're not evenly spaced at all. So I'm going to try that again. So every line we put down, we want it to be nice and light until you're comfortable and you're like, yeah, that's where that should go. Then you make it darker. And then, but really nothing if you're planning to add watercolor to this, then we really don't need to add dark lines to any of it. If you're drawing on your watercolor paper because you plan to attend the next couple weeks classes, then please make everything nice and light so that it can disappear under the watercolor paint. But if you're just sketching this by itself just tonight with me, then we will add some darkness at the end to areas of darkness in the photograph. So we'll look at the value in the photograph, but the world is made up of light, not hard lines. Although if you wanted to put sort of a cartoonish illustrative style on this photograph, I think this one would definitely make sense to make it sort of cartoonish and hard lines. Okay, so I just radiated out from the center there, and then I need to erase a little bit over here because this is where that big water glass is going. So that's the other reason to keep these lines nice and light. There are lots of reasons to keep it all nice and light. Okay, so when it comes to the water glass, we are creating a cylinder that is more narrow at the bottom. So we're gonna start with light sketchy lines. It goes off of the page a little bit, so we're only seeing kind of half of the glass, and it comes down into, it's in line with the paper on the cupcake, so not quite down that far. And then we've got a little half circle that also curves down because the eye line is up here on the horizon line. And so we do see the top of the glass, like we're looking down at it just a little bit, since the top of the glass is just below the eye line. So we've got another sort of elliptical shape right here. And where we put dark lines on the cylinder are really going to depend on the way the light is hitting the glass. So we're going to come back to it in just a bit. For now, we're just going to put the shape of the water into it. So it's very similar to the shape at the top of the glass. For the water, we're doing this kind of really stretched out oval shape. And I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit here. If I go too fast, you can always watch the recording of the class later and slow it down or pause it as needed. So we still got to get this building back here. We got about 21 minutes, but I know we can do it. Okay, so that is the 1-point perspective that we're seeing in the photograph, except for the paper on the cupcake, which we'll get to in just a bit, and what's going on inside of the water glass. And I'm going to make sure I get to that before the 10-minute mark. But let's look at everything in the back of the photograph. So if you stuck with me for a while now in the perspective drawing classes, then you know that if we're looking at if something is facing us, if the horizontal parallel lines on a geometric form are facing us, they are not affected by the optical illusion of linear perspective because they're not traveling away from us towards that vanishing point on the horizon line. They appear as they actually are, which is parallel and straight. So all of the vertical and horizontal lines on this other skyscraper building across from me in the cupcake in the photograph, they're just straight. They're just straight lines. So the only thing that is affected by linear perspective here is what's happening up here on these balconies. And we can take our ruler and put them on the orthogonal lines at the bottom of that balcony there. And we can see that they also follow the rules of perspective, and they seem to converge at this vanishing point on our horizon. So let's go ahead and find that line, those couple of lines. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to look for the vertical line here and where that should be. And it is coming into the top of the water glass, right about there, like a little bit of the ways into the water glass. So I'm going to use the water glass to help measure and find the side of that building. So I'm just going to get a straight vertical line right here. And then since everything's kind of what's inside of the water glass is distorted, I don't really need it to be a straight line here. I can just sketch kind of a wonky line right here. I can sketch kind of pulse rate on a heart monitor for the tops of the buildings over here. They don't have to be perfect. Unless you want them to be, then you can slow down and try to make them more as they appear in the photograph. We just want this line to be straight, and I did not draw it perfectly straight the first time, and maybe you didn't either. So we want to line up our ruler with either the edge of the paper or another straight line that we have in the image, and then that's how we know that we're getting a straight vertical line for the side of the building. Okay, and then I'm just going to use my ruler from the vanishing point to radiate up there to that balcony. And one of the bottoms of the balconies comes into the frame just under the top of the frame, and the other one is, let's see how far apart they are in relationship to each other. I mean, honestly, I'm in the school of anything can be eyeballed, that we don't need to measure and make things perfect. But if you want to measure it and make it, you know, evenly spaced, I think I possibly did take my ruler and measure that. So, or at least I used my ruler to draw it. I can tell you right now, I probably did not measure it. Let's try it right about here. I'm a fan of just trying it and then seeing how it looks and then fixing it later if I don't like it. Okay, but I'm going to use my ruler a lot for drawing the building because I think just sketching it in without using the ruler made my lines get super wonky in a way that was kind of distracting. So I'm going to use my ruler to get all of these kind of like a graphing paper lines happening across the page. So, but in between these two balconies, there is a straight horizontal line, like a landing in between the balconies. So it's a little bit above that diagonal line we just added, that orthogonal line. Do a little rectangle right there to sandwich the balconies. And I'm going to do that again below that one. Okay. And then I'm just going to take my ruler and I'm not going to fill in the whole thing like this because I'm not sure if we have the time, but I'm just going to scooch my ruler over a little bit at a time and just keep drawing these vertical lines until I get something that feels like that. And I'll do that for a lot of the space on the building. But then I want to get the shape of this building that's being reflected. It's the building that I was in when I was taking the photograph. That's what's being reflected across on the other skyscraper. Okay, so it's got a little bit of a half circle shape at the top, but this one, since it's being distorted by the, the reflection, it's a little wonky. So we're not going to use our ruler for this. We're just going to sketch it in and try to just get the overall shape. And we're not going to worry about it being perfect. And we can even, for the windows, they can be a little wonky. I think for the other windows on the skyscraper, having them be using my ruler made sense, but for these, I left them kind of wonky, and I'm going to keep them kind of wonky even when we add the watercolor so that it's obvious that those are the reflection, just like a reflection in water on a pond is, going to be a little distorted and not perfect unless there was, no wind that day. But okay, so we'll go all the way down the side of this building, making these wonky rectangular window shapes. I'm not going to fill all of them in for the sake of time. And then the same thing on the other side. We'll just go all the way down the page, just scooting our ruler a little bit each time to get those vertical lines in there. And then we'll go horizontally with our ruler go around the other building reflection, and we'll just scooch a little bit each time. Okay, I'm not going to finish it because I want to make sure we have time to get to everything else. Okay, there's this bar here in the way that's blocking our view of the building. We can erase our vanishing point now because we don't need it anymore. So I'm not measuring, I'm just looking, and I'm getting this bar shape in there. You can make it thicker if you want, but that looks pretty good to me in relationship to the other stuff in the photo. And then we also have this part of the balcony on the little banister wall here on the balcony that I was sitting on. Okay, and then we'll continue sketching the building and everything as we see it back there. Okay, what are we missing? The water and the water glass, the rest of the skyline. So the skyline, we can do just our irregular heart rate monitor thing again. We're gonna kind of silhouette a lot of that out and make it very implied when we add our paint to it. So we can keep it nice and loose and sketchy. Okay, so let's talk about the cupcake itself. I'm gonna switch to a darker pencil now and start to look at some of the details and the value in the cupcake, and same thing with the water reflections in the water glass. Okay, so let's look at the value shapes. If we're talking about that value scale from 0 to 10, which we've done tons of times in these classes for almost 2 years now, you can refer back to almost any class or that first class on Intro to Value and Drawing Forms, Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms, and I talk about the value scale from 0 to 10. So 10 being the absolute black and 0 being the absolute white. And we can outline the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light that we're seeing on this cupcake. And the absolute black, the 10 that we're seeing, is in the center of the chocolate. That's where it's absorbing all of the light. Everywhere else is more of like an 8 or a 9 on the value scale. Even our shadow on the falling across down here, it doesn't get to an absolute 10. It's more of like a 7 on the value scale. But we might we're going to add the pen and ink, and we're going to emphasize a few of these places where we see some darker shadows. So that's why I wanted to keep all this nice and light. So there is a little bit of a half circular shape that does get to a 10 at moments here, but for the most part, the chocolate is the only place where it goes to absolute black. Okay, and then we've got 2 layers to our icing here. So we've got these 2 kind of hamburger patty shapes to the icing, and we want those to be nice and curved. And we really want to pay attention to the contour lines here. So that Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms class would actually be really helpful if you're struggling to make this look 3-dimensional, because it's the same as what we did with that apple in the very first class. We've got these curves happening down on the vertical axis and curves on the horizontal axis, because it's very curved and rounded, but it's got kind of like a donut shape or a hamburger patty sort of shape here, right? But then it's got the icing coming onto it, so that shape is obstructed a little more. So the icing is around the cherry. It's not in front of the cherry only. And then it cascades down here and does this. And it needs to kind of dip and curve with the contours of the frosting, otherwise it's not going to be convincing. So make sure it kind of follows that curve. All right, so you want something like that. And then now is a good time to focus on the shape of that cherry. Once we've got the icing, I mean the chocolate frosting in there. And then the cherry has a nice, like some reflective light happening here. We've got this shape of reflective light. There's a lot of different value happening on the cherry. And that's very important when we go to add all those reds over the next couple weeks with our watercolor. We've got a diagonal line for the stem of the cherry, but that is also three-dimensional. So we're going to give it a little bit of dimension. The pineapple has a little bit of dimension here. It's not perfectly flat. We can see the side of the wedge there. And then we've got all these little, what do you call them? I want to say confetti sprinkles. Thank you. Could not think of the word sprinkles. So we'll go ahead and put the sprinkles in there. And then let's look at the value on the cupcake itself on this icing. So this white icing is not absolute white. The light's hitting it directly at the top right here. And then it's kind of creating like a little window pattern right here. And that's probably because there's a window behind me. Isn't light amazing, you guys? The cupcake is reflecting the window behind me. So, and then that's from the chocolate. Or maybe that's the chocolate creating those shadows. I'm a little confused. Okay, but there's a shadow and there's light right here. So let's make sure you've got an understanding of that, because when we go to add our shadows with the watercolor, we want to make sure that we're accounting for all of those shapes of shadows and light. That's going to make it feel like a real cupcake. All right, and then here's where that other perspective comes in, where I was mentioning that coffee cup perspective class, is we want to get this radiating out. So we've got a center vertical straight line, and then from that center, we're going to think about like a vanishing point. It's kind of like we haven't gotten to 3-point perspective. Well, we did do 3-point perspective of like a box. We are going to get to 3-point perspective studies soon. But honestly, it doesn't have to be perfect 3-point perspective here. I mean, just get it radiating out. And it doesn't even all radiate out from the same point. It's just, y'all know what the paper on a cupcake does. Just drawing it's a little tricky. So something like that. Okay, and then it kind of does this little crinkle thing here. So we want to get a line that dips and curves into all of those ridges we just drew. We want a curved line for the cakey part of the cupcake, and then we want to make sure we leave some room for the shadow, which I did not leave a lot of room for the shadow, but I'll make sure I do when I draw it again on my watercolor paper. All right, we got the shadow in there. How are we doing on time? We got 6 minutes until the end of the class. All right, let's get some value in here. Oh wait, we forgot about the water cup. Jeez. Okay, so the water cup. We got a shadow coming off of that one that is going in this same direction as the shadow on the cupcake. So a little more to the left there. Okay, and then we've got another little half circular shape where we're seeing the bottom of the glass. We've got this line going rogue because it's being distorted. So we've got a couple of lines from the wood slats that are going in a crazy direction here. And even like the table is being skewed by the reflection of the water a little bit in there. But we're not going to worry about getting like a perfect hyper realistic water reflection here. We just want the idea or the sense of distortion of these values. So just going to get those main points in there and then just get a few little wobbly shapes that follow the contours of all of those shapes, of all those lines. So they kind of just some irregular patches of shapes that we can use to put some different gray and blue tones that will give the illusion of the water. Okay, and if you're stopping here with me, you're not going to continue on to the class where we add watercolor over the next couple of weeks, then you can take your heavier B pencils, and everywhere where you're seeing dark value, you can just take the side of your pencil and give it the appropriate value if you wanted this to just be sketched in graphite. But I think that's pretty good, and we covered all of our bases because the class was just advertised as being just a sketch here. So we're not going to go too much into the details, but I can't help wanting to give a little something to everyone. So it just make sure that you're adding value that follows the contours of the form. So if it's flat like the plate, you can give it like a flat diagonal line here as you fill it in. If you're filling in something like the chocolate sauce, you'll make sure that your lines are following the curve of the cupcake as it cascades down on that chocolate sauce. If you're adding hatching lines to the background of the table, like we're going to do with the pen and ink over the next couple of weeks, you want to make sure that those are following the contours, which means it's following the orthogonal lines. So we want to make sure those are radiating in the same direction towards that vanishing point. But it's pretty easy to just eyeball it and just, make sure that it kind of mirrors, or not mirrors, but, follows the same path as the wood slat lines that we put here. All right, I feel like once we got the cat out of the way, we really zipped through a lot of that pretty quickly, but there's our sketch. Are there any questions or anything I didn't cover? If we don't get to them now, you can join me on Instagram for that Q&A and I can answer them there on Instagram at Adrian Hodge Art. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my camera. And I'd love to see some of your sketches. So if you'd like to hold up your sketchbook and we can spotlight you and see how your cupcake sketch came along. Oh yes, I love that chocolate sauce is really following the contours of that cupcake form. It's very convincing. Lovely. All right, we got another one. Nice and light. I like it. Keeping it nice and light. All right, looking good. Oh, look at that. Yes, that's nice and bold. Very lovely. Oh, look at that one. That's gorgeous. Yeah, please feel free to tag me on if you post this anywhere. I'd love to share it out on my Instagram. Oh, it's another beautiful one. Yeah, the way you're capturing the light on that. Y'all have got an understanding of contours and light and forms here. I am not worried about you. Look at that. That's beautiful. Oh, that's another strong one. Yeah, you can always, oh, I love how you're editing that to make it more like a vertical framed like that. That's nice. That's going to be really fun. I love that kind of paper. Very nice. Yes. Yeah, that contrast of that, if you you nailed the chocolate sauce. You can nail that chocolate sauce and how it's curving over the form like that. That's what I think brings this image to life, makes it look so realistic. Oh, and look at that fun border on your Zoom. That's really fun. Yeah, that's looking good. Maybe radiate your lines on the cupcake paper out a little more, in like a V pattern going out so it feels more three-dimensional. There's Sarah. Oh, Sarah, look at that. That's gorgeous. I love some of you regulars who come all the time getting to see your skills progress. That's really nice, Sarah. Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, okay, that was it. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me tonight, and hopefully you will join me for the follow-up classes so we can have a satisfying end to adding watercolor to them. You're going to want to sketch this again on the watercolor paper next week. I'm going to have it pre-sketched on my watercolor paper, and I'm going to just kind of dive in from there. So I'm not going to go over drawing it since we did it here tonight. I'll be on Instagram soon if anybody wants to join me there and continue just talking or commenting on the class, or if you had any questions. And I'll see you again soon. Thank you and have a great evening. Good night.